The flood had taken everything it wanted. Now, 3 days later, it was finally giving some of it back. The morning sun broke across Clearwater Basin like a wound opening, spilling amber light across miles of devastated rangeland. What had once been rolling pastures and orderly fence lines was now a churned wasteland of mud, debris, and standing water that reflected the sky like broken mirrors scattered across the earth. Uprooted trees lay tangled with the carcasses of cattle. Fence posts jutted from the mire at wrong angles. The smell hung over everything, that thick mineral scent of disturbed earth mixed with something older, something that spoke of things dying beneath the surface. The Double K cattle station had survived, barely. The main house stood on high ground, untouched by the waters that had swept through the lower pastures with biblical fury. The barns were damaged but standing. The bunkhouse had lost its porch. But the heart of the operation, the cattle, the equipment, the infrastructure that made the Double K one of the largest working ranches in the state, had weathered the storm. Not everyone who worked there had been so lucky. Leo walked the perimeter fence alone. He moved slowly, deliberately, his boots sinking into mud that grabbed at him with each step. He was a tall man, lean as a fence rail, with hands that were calloused from years of work and a face that rarely showed expression. His age was difficult to determine, somewhere between 30 and 50, weathered by sun and wind and a lifetime of labor that had started when he was barely old enough to lift a hay bale. He didn't speak much. That was the first thing anyone noticed about Leo. He could go entire days without saying more than a handful of words, communicating instead through nods and gestures and the quiet competence of his work. Some people thought he was simple, others thought he was mute. The truth was somewhere else entirely, buried deep in a past he never discussed. The Weiss ranch hands called him Ghost. The foreman called him something else. Leo stopped at a section of fence that had been completely washed away. The posts were gone, carried downstream by waters that had risen 15 feet in a single night. He pulled a worn notebook from his jacket pocket and made a mark, another repair to add to a list that was already impossibly long. Movement caught his eye. Leo was used to being invisible, but what he found in the mud was about to make him the center of attention. But real quick, before he steps into the water, if you love stories about the quiet ones who saved the day, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss the rest of the story. Now, let's see what was moving in the debris, something in the marshes. A flash of motion in the peripheral distance where the solid ground gave way to treacherous wetlands that had swallowed cattle and men alike over the years. The locals called it the drowning field. Even before the flood, it had been dangerous. Now, saturated with runoff and churned by the violence of the waters, it was a death trap. Leo squinted against the morning light. There, again. A dark shape struggling in the mud, maybe 200 yards out. Too big to be a coyote, too frantic to be debris caught in the current of a hidden stream. He started walking toward it. The ground grew softer with each step, transitioning from muddy earth to something that sucked at his boots like hungry mouths. He found a path along a ridge of higher ground, picking his way carefully, testing each footfall before committing his weight. 50 yards out, he stopped. His breath caught in his chest. It was a horse, or rather, it was what was left of a horse, just a head and the arch of a neck rising from a sea of gray-brown quicksand. The animal's nostrils flared with each desperate breath, blowing out mud with every exhale. Its eyes, wide and white-rimmed with terror, rolled toward Leo as he approached. The horse tried to struggle, to pull itself free, but the movement only caused it to sink another inch into the mire. Leo had seen horses die before. He had seen them fall and break their legs, seen them torn by barbed wire, seen them succumb to colic and old age, and the thousand small cruelties that the world inflicted on creatures too beautiful to survive, it unchanged. He had learned to harden himself against it, to accept death as part of the natural order of ranch life. But this was different. This horse was still fighting. Exhausted beyond measure, trapped in a grave that was slowly swallowing it alive, the animal refused to give up. Each shallow breath was an act of defiance. Each blink of those terrified eyes was a declaration that it wasn't finished yet. Leo understood that kind of stubbornness. He had lived it. The sound of hoofbeats made him turn. A rider was approaching from the direction of the main house, moving fast along the same ridge Leo had followed. Even at a distance, Leo recognized the posture, straight-backed, arrogant, radiating authority like heat from a furnace. Silas. The foreman of the Double K reined his horse to a stop, 10 feet from where Leo stood. He was a big man, barrel-chested and thick-necked, with a face that seemed permanently arranged into an expression of contempt. His hat was expensive, one of the few things about him that was, and he wore it pushed back on his head like a crown. Well, well. Silas's voice carried the lazy drawl of a man who had never needed to hurry in his life. "What did you find, Grunt? Another dead cow for the count?" Leo didn't answer. He simply pointed toward the struggling horse. Silas urged his mount forward a few steps, peering out at the trapped animal. His expression didn't change. If anything, it hardened. "Ah, that's a shame." He reached down to his saddle and drew a rifle from its scabbard. The weapon was well maintained, the wood of the stock polished to a shine. Silas checked the chamber with practiced efficiency. "What are you doing?" Leo's voice came out rough, unused. Silas looked at him with something like surprise. The grunt speaks. He swung down from his horse, keeping the rifle in his hands. "What does it look like I'm doing? I'm putting that animal out of its misery. It's called a mercy kill." He started forward, finding his own path toward a spot that would give him a clear shot. Leo moved to intercept him. "It's a kindness," Silas continued, his tone the patient condescension of a man explaining something simple to a child. "Even if we could pull him out, and we can't, not without equipment we don't have, his legs are shattered. A horse stuck in quicksand that long, struggling that hard. The bones grind against each other, the muscles tear." He raised the rifle to his shoulder, sighting down the barrel. "One bullet is more mercy than that beast has any right to expect." Leo stepped directly into his line of fire. For a long moment, neither man moved. Silas's face darkened. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes, a warning, a threat, the promise of violence that had always lurked just beneath his surface charm. "Move, Grunt!" Leo didn't move. "I said move." Silas's voice dropped lower, harder. "You're not paid to think. You're barely paid at all. Now get out of my way before I decide to save myself the cost of your food and board." Leo's hands hung at his sides. His face showed nothing. No fear, no anger, no emotion of any kind. But his eyes, fixed on Silas's, held something that made the foreman hesitate. He wasn't finished yet. The words came out quiet, steady. Leo nodded toward the trapped horse, whose desperate breaths still fogged the morning air. Silas's lip curled. "You want to play hero? Fine." He raised the rifle slightly, pointing it past Leo toward the sky, and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked across the marshes like a whip. Birds exploded from the nearby trees. The trapped horse screamed, a sound of pure terror that echoed across the flooded landscape. "There's your warning shot." Silas lowered the weapon, his eyes never leaving Leo's face. "Now, here's your choice. You can step aside, let me do what needs doing, and we go back to pretending you're worth the scraps I feed you. Or, you can stay there and die with him." Leo didn't move. "Have it your way." Silas spat in the mud at Leo's feet. "You want to save him so bad? Go ahead. But know this, you're both fired. You set foot on Double K land again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." He turned and walked back to his horse with the unhurried gait of a man who had never been challenged in a way that mattered. "Good luck, Grunt." Silas swung into the saddle, looking down at Leo with something between pity and disgust. "The marshes don't care how stubborn you are." He rode away without looking back. Leo watched him go. Then he turned to face the trapped horse, still struggling, still fighting, still refusing to surrender to the mud that was slowly claiming it. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Leo smiled. "All right," he said softly. "Let's see what we're working with." He took a step toward the quicksand. The mud was alive. That was Leo's first coherent thought as he waded into the mire. It moved around him with a consciousness of its own, probing for weakness, searching for purchase. Each step required effort, not just the physical strain of pulling his legs free, but the mental discipline of not panicking as the ground tried to swallow him. He had worked around quicksand before. He knew the rules. Move slowly, don't fight it, distribute your weight as broadly as possible, never, ever make sudden movements. The horse didn't know these rules. As Leo approached, the animal's terror redoubled. It thrashed its head, straining against the grip of the mud, and the movement drove it another inch deeper. The quicksand had risen to the bottom of its jaw now. Another few inches, and it would be breathing mud. Easy. Leo's voice came out in a low, steady murmur, the same tone he used with spooked cattle, with scared children, with anything that needed to know it wasn't alone. Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you. The horse's eye rolled toward him, white showing all around the dark iris. Its nostrils flared. A low sound came from its throat, not quite a whinny, more like a moan of exhaustion and fear. Leo reached the animal's side. Up close, the extent of its predicament became clear. The horse was buried deep, its legs completely submerged, its body encased in mud up to the withers. Only the neck and head remained above the surface, and even those were sinking with each passing minute. The quicksand had formed a seal around the animal's body, creating a suction that no amount of struggling could break. Silas might have been right about one thing. Without equipment, without help, extracting this horse should have been impossible. But Leo had never put much stock in impossible. He reached out slowly, giving the horse time to see his hand, to smell him, to understand that this new presence wasn't a threat. The animal flinched, preparing for pain, for cruelty, for all the things that humans had taught it to expect. Leo's hand came to rest on the horse's muzzle. The touch was gentle, light as a whisper. He let his palm rest there, feeling the heat of the animal's breath, the trembling of muscles pushed beyond exhaustion. Then he did something strange. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against the horse's muzzle, human brow to equine nose, breathing the same air, sharing the same space. And he began to hum. It wasn't a song exactly, more like a vibration, a low and steady note that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. The sound traveled through the point of contact between them, through bone and flesh and the mysterious pathways of the nervous system. The horse's trembling began to slow. Its breathing, which had been rapid and ragged, started to even out. The wild panic in its eye faded, replaced by something else. Confusion at first, then a gradual, tentative trust. Leo kept humming. Minutes passed. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist and revealing the full scope of the devastation that the flood had left behind. Somewhere in the distance, Leo could hear the sound of machinery, the Double K's recovery efforts continuing without him. But here, in this pocket of stillness, surrounded by treacherous mud and standing water, time seemed to have stopped. When Leo finally pulled back, the horse didn't panic. It watched him with something that looked almost like curiosity, as if trying to understand this strange human who had stepped into quicksand to be with him rather than walking away. All right, Leo nodded, more to himself than to the horse. Here's what we're going to do. He began to dig, not with a shovel. He didn't have one, not with any tool at all. Just his bare hands, plunging into the mud around the horse's submerged body, scooping away handfuls. Of the thick, sucking mire, the work was brutal. For every handful he removed, it seemed like two more flowed in to take its place. The quicksand was cold, sapping the heat from his fingers until they went numb. His back screamed in protest as he bent and straightened, repeating the same motion hundreds of times. But slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, he began to make progress. He wasn't trying to dig the horse out. That would have been impossible. Instead, he was creating what old-timers called a suction break, disturbing the seal between the animal's body and the mud, introducing air pockets that would weaken the grip of the quicksand. Hours passed. The sun traced its arc across the sky, climbing toward noon and then beginning its descent toward evening. Leo lost track of time. His world narrowed to the rhythm of the work. Dig, scoop, throw, dig again. His arms ached, his back burned. The cold of the mud had seeped into his bones, making every movement an act of will. But he kept going, because the horse was watching him. Those dark eyes, no longer wild with panic, followed his every movement. When Leo paused to rest, the horse would nicker softly, as if encouraging him to continue. When his hands found a particularly stubborn pocket of mud, the horse would hold perfectly still, understanding somehow that movement would undo all his progress. They were working together. In his 30 years of working with animals, Leo had experienced many things. He had gentled wild mustangs and calmed birthing cows, and once talked a range bull out of charging him through sheer force of will. But he had never felt a connection like this, a partnership that transcended the barrier between species. This horse knew it was being saved, and it was doing everything in its power to help. By late afternoon, Leo had cleared enough space around the horse's front legs to attempt the next phase of his plan. He had spotted a fallen log earlier, a thick piece of cottonwood that had been deposited by the flood maybe 50 feet away. He had dismissed it initially, too focused on the immediate crisis. Now he saw its potential. Getting to the log meant leaving the horse. Leo hesitated. The animal had been calm for hours, but horses were unpredictable. If it panicked while he was gone, if it started struggling again, all his work would be undone in seconds. He pressed his forehead to the horse's muzzle one more time. "I'll be right back." The horse exhaled slowly, a long breath that fogged the cooling air. Leo moved. The trip to the log and back was the longest 30 minutes of his life. The mud seemed even more treacherous now, as if sensing that he was tired, that his defenses were down. He sank to his thighs twice, having to fight his way free with the last reserves of his strength. But he made it back with the log. The next part was the most dangerous. Using the log as a ramp, Leo positioned it at an angle leading from the horse's submerged front legs to a section of slightly higher ground. The idea was simple in theory. Give the horse something solid to push against, something that would help it lever itself out of the mud's grip. In practice, it meant putting his own body in harm's way. He slid down into the mud beside the horse's chest, positioning himself below the animal's shoulder. If the horse managed to free its front legs and push up, its hooves would come down exactly where Leo was lying. He could be crushed in an instant. "Easy now." Leo's voice was barely a whisper. "We're going to do this together. On 3. He braced his hands against the horse's chest, feeling the steady pound of its heartbeat beneath his palms. 1. The horse's muscles tensed. 2. Leo took a deep breath. 3. He pushed. The horse pushed. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. The mud held firm, refusing to release its prize. Then, with a sound like a giant sucking in breath, the seal broke. The horse's front leg came free. Its hoof found the log. Leo rolled desperately to the side as the animal heaved itself forward, its other front leg emerging from the mire in a spray of mud. The movement drove the horse's back end deeper, but now it had leverage. Leo scrambled around to the horse's rear, ignoring his exhaustion, ignoring the screaming protest of muscles that had been pushed past their limits. He dug furiously around the back legs, creating another suction break while the horse held its new position. An hour later, both back legs were free. The horse stood on the log, trembling but standing, its body still caked in thick mud, but no longer trapped in it. Night had fallen. The temperature was dropping fast, heading toward freezing. Leo could see his breath fogging the air, could feel the cold biting at his exposed skin. His clothes were soaked through with mud and sweat and the icy water that had seeped up from the quicksand. The horse was shivering too. Without hesitation, Leo stripped off his jacket, the only protection he had against the cold, and draped it over the horse's back. It barely covered the animal's withers, but it was something. The horse turned its head and looked at him. Their eyes met in the darkness. Two survivors, clinging to each other at the edge of a marsh that had tried to swallow them both. Two creatures who had every reason to give up and hadn't. Leo smiled through chattering teeth. "We're not finished yet," he said. He settled in beside the horse, pressing his body against its mud-caked side for warmth, and prepared to wait for dawn. The helicopter came with the sun. Leo heard it before he saw it. The distinctive thump of rotors cutting through the morning air, growing louder as it approached from the east. He had spent the night in a half-sleep, jerking awake every time the horse shifted, making sure the animal didn't slide back into the treacherous mud. They had survived, barely. Leo's skin had turned a grayish blue from the cold. His fingers refused to bend. The horse beside him was still standing, a miracle in itself, but its head hung low and its breathing was shallow and labored. The helicopter swept over the marshes, its shadow passing across the flooded landscape like a dark bird. Then it doubled back. Leo raised one numb arm and waved. Inside the helicopter, the pilot leaned forward in his seat, squinting through the morning glare. He had been searching these marshes for 3 days, following every lead, checking every report of large animals spotted in the flood zone. His name was William Drake, and he was not a man accustomed to disappointment. "Call it in," he said to his co-pilot. "We've got something." The helicopter descended, hovering as close to the marsh as the pilot dared. From this angle, the scene below came into focus. A man covered head to toe in dried mud, standing beside what appeared to be a large mound of the same substance. Only when the mound moved, lifting its head toward the sound of the rotors, did Drake realize what he was looking at. A horse, alive. The rescue operation took 2 hours. Drake's team was experienced in large animal extraction. He owned one of the most elite breeding facilities in the state, and his horses were valuable enough to justify maintaining a full emergency response capability. They lowered a specialized harness from the helicopter, talked Leo through the process of securing it around the horse's body, and began the slow, careful work of winching the animal to safety. The horse didn't struggle. After everything it had been through, it seemed to understand that these new humans were helpers, not threats. It allowed itself to be lifted from the mud, rotating slowly as the cable carried it towards solid ground. Leo had to be carried out himself. His legs gave out the moment the adrenaline faded. 2 of Drake's men waded in with a portable stretcher and extracted him from the marsh, laying him on dry ground beside the horse that he had spent 18 hours refusing to abandon. Medics swarmed over both of them. The horse was washed down first. Buckets of warm water poured over its mud-caked body, while gentle hands worked to clear the debris from its eyes and nostrils. The animal stood patiently, occasionally turning its head to look at Leo, as if making sure the human who had saved it was still there. And then the water ran clear. And then everyone went silent. The horse's coat, hidden beneath layers of dried mud, was not brown or black or gray. It was gold, a deep metallic gold that caught the morning light and threw it back in shimmering waves. The mane, freed from its coating of debris, fell across the animal's neck in platinum waves. It was the most beautiful horse anyone present had ever seen. William Drake pushed through the crowd of rescue workers, his face pale. "Check the lip," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Check the tattoo." One of the handlers carefully lifted the horse's upper lip, revealing the identifying tattoo that all registered horses carried. Drake leaned in to read the numbers. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then he stepped back, running one hand through his hair, and began to laugh. It wasn't humor. It was relief so intense it could only express itself in that strange, breathless sound. 3 days, he said. 3 days we've been looking. The handler looked confused. "Sir?" Drake turned to face his team, his eyes bright. "That horse," he said, pointing at the golden stallion that was now standing tall and proud despite everything it had endured, "is Midas, the Akal Teke. He's worth $5 million, and he's been missing since the flood hit." The words rippled through the gathered crowd. People pulled out phones, searching for information, gasping as they found articles and photographs of the legendary stallion, the horse with the golden coat that had won championships across 3 continents. Midas. The name fit perfectly. The sound of a vehicle made everyone turn. A mud-splattered truck was approaching fast, bouncing over the rutted ground with complete disregard for its suspension. It skidded to a stop just outside the ring of rescue workers, and Silas stepped out. The foreman had changed since yesterday. He had put on his best hat, his cleanest boots. His face was arranged into an expression of concern that looked about as natural as a wolf pretending to be a sheep. "Thank God you found him," Silas said, striding toward the gathered crowd with the confidence of a man who expected to be obeyed. "I've been organizing search parties since dawn. Soon as I heard about the helicopter," he stopped. His eyes had found Leo, still lying on the stretcher, still covered in the dried mud that proved exactly how long he had been in that marsh. "You," Silas said. The word was flat. "Dangerous. You found him?" Leo didn't answer. He was watching Silas's face, seeing the calculations happening behind those mean little eyes. The foreman was putting it together. The timeline, the implications, what it would mean if the truth came out? Well, Silas recovered quickly, pasting that false concern back onto his features. Of course Leo found him. That's why I sent him out there. Best tracker on the Double K. He turned to Drake with an outstretched hand. I'm Silas Morton, foreman of the Double K. I believe we've done business before. That horse would have died without my man's quick thinking. Course, we'll need to discuss the finder's fee. Drake looked at the outstretched hand. He didn't take it. Your man, he repeated slowly. The one you sent out there. That's right. Then why is he hypothermic? Drake's voice had gone cold. Why is he alone? Why did my crew find him 18 hours into a one-man rescue operation without any equipment, any backup, any sign that anyone from the Double K came to help? Silas's smile faltered. Well, the conditions were dangerous. I couldn't risk... I have a lot of friends in this valley, Mr. Morton. Drake stepped closer, and despite being several inches shorter than Silas, he somehow seemed to tower over the foreman. I made some calls this morning while my team was setting up the extraction. Would you like to know what I heard? Silas said nothing. I heard that you rode out yesterday morning. Drake's voice carried across the gathered crowd. I heard that you found this horse already trapped in the quicksand. I heard that you pulled out your rifle to put it down. And this man, he pointed at Leo, stepped in front of the barrel. The silence that followed was absolute. I heard, Drake continued, that you fired a warning shot and rode away, that you told him he was fired, that you left him alone in a flooded marsh to die with a horse that wasn't worth your time to save. Silas's face had gone the color of old meat. Now, see here, a horse worth $5 million. Drake smiled, and there was no warmth in it. A horse that my facility has been searching for desperately since the flood. Horse that would have died if not for a man you call Grunt. He turned away from Silas as if the foreman had ceased to exist. Leo was sitting up now, helped by one of the medics. His color was returning, though his fingers were still wrapped in warming blankets. He looked exhausted, wrung out, pushed past every limit of human endurance. But he was watching Midas. The golden stallion had turned to face him, ignoring the handlers, ignoring the crowd, ignoring everything except the man who had spent 18 hours refusing to let him die. Those dark eyes, intelligent and knowing, held Leo's gaze with something that looked very much like gratitude. Drake approached the stretcher. What's your name? He asked. Leo? Just Leo? A pause, then quietly, Leo Harris. Drake nodded. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather checkbook. Old-fashioned, expensive, the kind that only people with real money still used. Mr. Harris, we posted a reward for Midas's safe return. $500,000. He wrote the check with quick, decisive strokes and held it out to Leo. This is yours. Leo looked at the check. His expression didn't change. I didn't do it for money. I know. That's why you deserve it. For a long moment, Leo didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the check. He folded it once, twice, and slipped it into the pocket of his mud-caked shirt. There's something else, Drake said. I need a head trainer. Someone who understands horses the way you do. Someone who won't give up on them when things get hard. Leo looked up. Midas is going to need rehabilitation, months of it. Physical therapy, nutritional support, psychological healing. The quicksand might not have broken his legs, but it damaged his spirit. He needs someone who can bring him back. Drake held out his hand. What do you say, Mr. Harris? Will you take the job? In the background, Silas was being quietly escorted away by two of Drake's larger employees. He was protesting, threatening lawsuits and complaints, but no one was listening anymore. Leo looked at the golden horse. Midas looked back at him, and something passed between them, something that went beyond words, beyond species, beyond all the barriers that the world tried to put between creatures who understood each other's pain. Leo reached out and took Drake's hand. He wasn't finished yet. The morning light grew stronger, warming the marsh and burning away the last traces of mist. Midas stood in the center of a group of handlers, his golden coat gleaming like something out of legend. He was tired, visibly depleted, but he was standing. Against all odds, against all predictions, against the judgment of a man who had decided his life wasn't worth the effort of saving. He was standing. Leo walked toward him. The handlers stepped back, giving them space. Man and horse met in the center of that muddy clearing, surrounded by the wreckage of a flood that had tried to drown them both. Leo raised his hand and pressed it against Midas's muzzle, feeling the warmth of the animal's breath, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that had refused to stop. "We made it," Leo said softly. Midas exhaled slowly, a long breath that seemed to carry away all the fear and pain and exhaustion of the past 3 days. His head dropped, resting against Leo's chest, and he closed his eyes. Around them, the world continued its business. Trucks arrived, equipment was loaded, plans were made, and orders given. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the connection between a man who had nothing and a horse who had almost been nothing. Two survivors finding each other, two lives refusing to end before their time. Years later, people would tell the story. They would talk about the flood of 2024, about the legendary stallion who was lost and found, about the silent ranch hand who waded into quicksand and came out with a fortune and a future. But Leo never told the story himself. When people asked him about that night in the marsh, the 18 hours of digging, the cold, the terror, the impossible odds, he would just shake his head and look out at the pastures where Midas grazed with his growing herd of golden offspring. He was a good horse, Leo would say. He just needed someone to believe in him. And that, in the end, was all the story that mattered. The sun rose over Drake's facility, where Leo now lived in a cottage overlooking the training paddocks. In the distance, Midas ran along the fence line, his golden coat catching the light like a promise of better days. Some things that looked broken were just waiting for someone to see their worth. Some lives that seemed finished were only beginning. And sometimes the greatest treasures were found in the darkest places, buried in mud, sinking fast, with nothing but a stranger's stubborn refusal to let them go. Leo watched the golden horse run, and he smiled. Not finished yet. Never finished.